Welcome to, and today we have this session of introduction to rabbinic literature. We're going to talk about the Mishnah. I spoke about the Mishnah in general, about the layers, the concern of Rabbi Danasi about writing the Mishnayot, and his fear that if you once you write down the oral law, it becomes static and frozen, and it's going to lose the dynamic uh, evolution that it always had. But he decided to write it anyway. Last time, we looked at the first chapter of Masechet Kiddushin to see how it fits really into a different category of that of acquisitions, but it was put together with the second chapter because it somehow is connected to marriage. And today we're going to look at a couple other tractates and some issues that we have there. So here's the first chapter of Masechet Berakhot, and we're going to talk about Masechet Berakhot and also a halachic impact on the issue of Minyan, of having 10 people for Minyan. So in Masechet Berakhot, the first chapter starts, Me'ematai korin et shema be'arvit. I'm just going to read some of the titles of the beginning of the Mishnayot, not everything. So the first chapter opens with, from what time may one recite the Shema in the evening? Mishnah 2, from what time may one recite the Shema in the morning? Mishnah 3, Bet Shammai say, in the evening every man should recline and recite the Shema. In the morning, that's Mishnah 4, you recite 2 blessings before it and 2 after it. All these things are already established in our Siddur, so we know them. But this is the stage of formation of these halachot. And then it concludes with mentioning Yetziat Mitzrayim at night. It has its own place here, which I'm not going to go into. Then in chapter 2, if one was reading the Torah and the time came to read Shema, Mishnah 2, these are the breaks between the sections of the Shema. Mishnah 3, if you read the Shema and you didn't hear it, what is the law? Workers who have to be working on top of a tree or scaffolding, how do they read the Shema? What about a bridegroom or a mourner, etc.? And then in chapter 3, one whose dead relative lies before him, meaning he's about to proceed to a burial. What does he do about the Shema? Who is obligated, men, women, Baal Keri, one who had a seminal emission. What if one recalls in the middle of the tefillah, etc.? That's those are chapters 1 to 3. In chapter 4, we start talking about the morning tefillah. So if we, I know I just went very fast through the first lines of the Mishnayot, but if we ask, what is the theme of the first 3 chapters of the Mishnah, what will be the answer? The first 3 chapters of Masechet Berakhot deal with Kriyat Shema. When exactly do you read, in the morning, in the evening? What blessings come before it, after it? Who reads it? What about exceptional situations? So we could say Masechet Berakhot, first 3 chapters, Kriyat Shema. That's the theme. Now let's continue with the next chapters. Chapter 4, Tefilat HaShachar Ad Chatzot. The morning tefillah is until midday. Then we read about Rabbi Nehunya ben Akana, who used to pray a short tefillah. In Mishnah 3, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Akiva dispute regarding the nature of the daily tefillah, which we call today the Amidah. In Mishnah 4, they speak about, again, the nature of the character of this tefillah. In Mishnah 5 and 6, what if you're traveling? What do you do with tefillah? And in Mishnah 7, what do you do with tefillat Musaf? Chapter 5, one should not stand up to say tefillah unless he is in a reverent state of mind. Then what special additions do we have in the blessings, such as asking for the rain, Avdalah, etc.? what kind of tefillot can or cannot be included in the Amidah, Birkat Kohanim, and what if one made a mistake while praying. And then chapter 6 goes to speak about Berakhot. So here also we could mark a line and say chapter 4 and 5 speak about the tefillah, which we call the Amidah. So chapter 1, 2, 3, Kriyat Shema. Chapter 4, 5, tefillah. Chapter 6, Ketzad mevachin ala pirot. How do they bless over produce? Really, the translation should be, how does one say a blessing? That's the way of the manner of speech of the Mishnah. Ketzad mevachin, but we would translate it, how does one say a blessing over fruits? What if you said this bracha or the other? What bracha do you say in Mishnah 3? Al davar she'en gidulo min haaretz, of any food that does not grow, it's not a plant, is the priority, the order of brachot, if you have different foods in front of you, and whether the bracha of the wine includes the wine that you're doing before the meal, includes the wine after the meal. What is the law when people sit together? Do you say the bracha for others or not? Does in Mishnah 7, salted food and bread, do you have to say bracha for each one separately? What is the bracha after eating te'anim, anavim, ve'rimonim of the seven species? So we could say that chapter 6 focuses on birkot hanehenin, the brachot for the consumption of food before and after. Chapter 7 speaks about birkat hamazon, starting with the zimun, that the invitation to say the bracha, right? That the word lezamen is like the modern Hebrew lehazmin, to invite, to call over. So we are calling over people to say the bracha, and the Mishnah says, when three people eat together, they must say zimun. They say over which foods, who is included in this bracha, what is the text of the zimun, and whether groups who ate together can split or they must stick together until Birkat Hamazon. So chapter 7 is dedicated to the zimun. Now, chapter 8, אלו דברים שבין בית שמאי לבית הלל בסעודה. These are the things on which Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel disagree regarding the meal, and they have here several halachot. Some have to do with manners, some have to do with purity and impurity. Then they speak about Birkat Hamazon when it comes on Motzei Shabbat, and what bracha do you say for wine after Birkat Hamazon? So we could 6 and 7 and 8 are sort of each one of them dedicated to one theme. Chapter 6 is Birkat HaNehenim, over food. Chapter 7 is the Zimun, invitation for Birkat Hamazon, and chapter 8 Birkat Hamazon. But all of them together, we could say deal with the brachot. So 1, 2, 3 Shema, 4, 5 Tefillah, 6, 7, 8 brachot of the Zimun, of the over food, including Birkat Hamazon and Zimun. Chapter 9 speaks about הרואה מקום שנעשו בו ניסים לישראל. If one sees the place where miracles have been done for Israel, and then what do you say when you see comets, earthquakes, thunder, windy storms, a new house, if you buy new vessels or new garments, praying for before or during birth, when you travel, when you enter the city, when something bad happens to you, when something good happens to you. The Mishnah likes to conclude. In general, we could say that the Masechet Berakhot is faithful to its title. It is all about Berakhot. We put together the Shema, Tefillah, and then Berakhot for food, and then Berakhot for special occasions. This is the section of the Siddur where it says Berakhot Shlanias. We put them all there, right? Is a discussion of the setting of Tefillah. The whole discussion here is about the individual. There's no discussion of a minyan or a number of people, or there are certain things about the sanctity of the Bet Knesset. The only place in this tractate where there is a discussion of a number of people is in chapter 7, Mishnah 3. Let's read, let's see this. Ketzad mezaminin, bishlosha omer nevarech. How do you invite other people to recite Birkat Hamazon? If there are 3, then the one who says Birkat Hamazon says, let us bless. If there are 3 and him, so he says, not nevarech, let us bless, but you should bless. Meaning he counts those 3 as a group. He can invite them to say the blessing, even if he's not included. Even though he, of course, is included. If there are 10 people, he adds the word le'elokenu, which is the custom today. If there are 11, he says Baruchu Elohenu, which we don't do today. That's the opinion of the first author of the Mishnah, who is called the Tanakama, the anonymous speaker, who says it doesn't matter if you have 10 people or 100,000. You always say Nevarech le'Elohenu. However, there's a different opinion that is introduced without any transition, that when you have 100, you add Nevarech l'Adonai Elohenu. If you have 1,000, you say Nevarech l'Adonai Elohenu Elohei Israel. Let us say a blessing for Hashem, our God, the God of Israel. If there are 10,000, he says, let us say a bracha for Hashem Elokenu, the God of Israel, the God of hosts, he who dwells on the cherubim, for the food that we ate, etc. How likely is it that they had 10,000 people sitting together and eating, and one person calling Zimut for all? Obviously, it never happened, but it's a kind of a hypothetical development of an idea in the Mishnah. So this is Masechet Berakhot. That it does have subdivisions, even though, like I said, it seems cohesive because it is all about Berakhot. But when we go to the end of chapter 5, which ends with the Tefillah, it says, "Amitpalel v'ta'a siman ra'lo." One who is praying and makes a mistake, it is a bad sign for him. Im shaliach tziburu siman ra' l'sholchav mipnei sheshalucho shel adam kemoto. If he is the messenger for the congregation, it is a bad sign for those who have sent him, because one's messenger is equivalent to one's self. Then there's a story about Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who used to say the tefillah and would say, this one is going to survive and this one is not going to survive. And they asked him, how do you know? He said, I know according to the fluency of the tefillah that I'm doing. If I'm fluent, he will live. If I get confused, it's like Hashem does not want my tefillah. This is what we call divrei agada. It's not halacha. It's more a moral teaching that speaks about the kavanah of tefillah, and that probably was a separate file in the early time of the Mishnah. So that's Masechet Berakhot. I want to go to a different Masechet now, and that's Masechet Megillah. Masechet Megillah is in a different order, the order of Moed, that deals with the holidays and the special dates around the year. And Masechet Megillah should speak about reading the Megillah, right? It's about Purim. So let's see what we have here in Masechet Megillah. And in Masechet Megillah, there's a better example in the very structure of the Masechet to the process of oral transmission and associative thinking that sometimes it could throw you off so badly when you read the Mishnah, and especially when you read the Talmud. Because if we go with associative thinking and we say Thing 1 reminds me of thing 2, thing 3, thing 4, thing 5. By the time you get to thing 5, there might be no connection to thing 1. It's a completely different category. But in the Mishnah, you could circle back and go to where you were before. In the Talmud, where each one of those 5 things opens a whole discussion, by the time you end the discussion of thing 5, you are 30 pages away from the original story. So anyone who ever studied Talmud or Daf Yomi, which is for some people is considered like studying Talmud, is familiar with this problem. I'm going to pose it. Okay. So Masechet Megillah, I said tentatively should speak about Purim. So let's see what we have here. Masechet Megillah, first Mishnah. Megillah nikret ב-11, ב-12, ב-13, ב-14, ב-15. There's an option to read the Megillah on the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th of Adar. We are all familiar with the 14th and 15th. We don't practice 11th to the 13th today. That is a halacha that belongs to the time when people lived in villages and had no synagogues or gatherings that would allow them to read the Megillah. So when they would gather in Yerushalayim or in the big city for the market day, they would also hear the Megillah. And so the Gemara discuss how exactly that happens, which date falls when. It defines the difference between a big city where you have a bedin and people would come to read, and a small city where you could only read in certain times. Then in Mishnah 4 we read this: קראו את המגילה באדר הראשון ונתעברה השנה, קוראים אותה באדר השני. If they read the Megillah during the first Adar, and then the year was intercalated, and the court added one more month, which became Adar the second, קוראים אותה באדר השני. So first we see from here that the calendar was not set as it is today. Back in the day, you could have this experience of going through the month of Adar, celebrating Purim as if it is the only Adar of the year, and then towards the end of the month, you find, oh, we have another Adar. But now that we speak about the leap year, when you have 2 months of Adar, the Mishnah goes on to say, "En ben Adar harishon la'Adar hasheni, ela kirat ha'Megillah u'matanot la'evenim." The only difference between the first Adar and the second Adar is reading the Megillah and distributing gifts to the poor that are practiced in the second and not the first Adar. And that's when you know in advance, before the first Adar, that you're going to have 2 months of Adar. So far, we read 4 Mishnayot that dealt with Purim and the reading of the Megillah. But now the Mishnah made that statement. Look at that formula. En ben ela, which is a favorite way of the Talmud and the Mishnah to speak in double negative. There's no difference except for. We would have said the only difference is, but the Mishnah says there's no difference except for. En ben ela. But now that we said en ben ela, there's no difference except for. Now we have a long list of such pairs. Yom Tov and Shabbat. No difference except for you can make food on Yom Tov. Shabbat and Yom Kippur. No difference between them except for the punishment of transgressing them deliberately. 2 types of making a vow. No difference between them except for using certain things. 2 types of dedications to the temple. No difference between them except for one's liability for if they were stolen or lost. 2 types of zav. Someone have a sexually transmitted disease. Between that person, if he has an emission twice or 3 times. No difference between them except for a sacrifice. And then no difference between 2 types of lepers except for this. No difference between Sefer Torah and Tefillin Mezuzot except for the way they are written. Kohanim except for this. Large altar, small altar except for this. Altogether, if I count how many pairs are mentioned after the Megillah, we have 2, 4, 7, 8, 11, 12, 13, to the end of the chapter. So you see what I was referring to before, to the process of the associative connection in the Mishnah. We have 13 pairs of halachot that the only thing they have in common is that they are similar in most details except for one, but there's no connection between them. Now you go to the Gemara, there will be 30 pages of discussion on that, and it is a major distraction. That is where we see that there was no that's an example of for the lack of editing of the Mishnah, because that was important. This kind of mnemonic device or association, it was important when the Mishnah was studied by heart. You remembered a set of items that are connected by that characteristic of being almost identical except for one thing. But when you organize the halachot in a written form, you want to be able to retrieve them through the thematic connection. So I want to know the laws of Yom Tov, of the leper, of the person with the syphilis, and the person with the with leprosy, and the altars, each one in its place. I don't know that it is in Masechet Megillah. Then chapter 2 speaks about how to read the Megillah from the beginning to the end, or vice or in reverse. If you read it in sections, how it has to be written. What if you travel, you go from one city to another? When do you read the Megillah, and who can read the Megillah? Now here again we have the same example of digression, and that's because there are not that many laws around Megillah that could fill a whole tractate. Really, you could put the whole thing in one chapter. So this is like sort of filling the gaps. Okay, what else do we have to say? So in Mishnah 4 it says En korin et Megillah. Really, we should skip all these. One cannot read the Megillah before sunrise, but if you did after dawn, it's okay. But this is not enough for the Mishnah. The Mishnah adds, not only you can read the Megillah, there are other issues that you cannot do before sunrise, like such as circumcision, tevilah, sprinkling the blood of the red heifer, and a woman who's waiting for a certain calculation of nidah to go to the mikveh. And now that we said that about when do you start performing a certain mitzvah, the Mishnah goes on to say what are the mitzvot that you could perform all day until sunset. And we have here 24 items that only one of them is related to Purim: reading the Megillah, also reading the Hallel, blowing the shofar, taking the lulav, saying the prayer of Musaf, bringing the korban of Musaf, saying certain viduim over the sacrifices of Yom Kippur, leaning on the sacrifice, slaughtering it, raising the blood, bringing the blood to the altar, sprinkling it, dealing with the case of a sotah, of a deviant woman, Aigla, the heifer that is being slaughtered in the river when a murder victim has been found, and the purity of the Metzorah. So in that chapter that has so far in 5 Mishnayot, we had 2 Mishnayot that completely deviated to other topics, and the same with, now that we said what could you do all day, now we tell you what you could do all night. K'tzirat ha'omer ve'ekter halavim ve'varim, the harvesting the omer and bringing up on the mizbeach the innards that remain from the previous day. And that's the end of the chapter. So we have 6 Mishnayot. Out of those Mishnayot, only the 3 first ones deal with Megillah, and the rest are associative lists of things that could be done all day or all night. So very little material on Megillah in the first 2 chapters. Now we get to chapter 3. But you know what? Maybe let's see, this is chapter 4. Chapter 4, I'll come back to chapter 3 later. הקורא את המגילה עומד ויושב, כי ראה אחד, כי ראו שניים יצאו. One who reads the Megillah may position himself as he wishes, standing or sitting. Some people say Berakhot, some people don't say Berakhot. Today we do say Berakhot. בשני ובחמישי ובשבת במנחה, קוראים שלושה. On Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat afternoon, you read three. You have three olim, three readers, no less, no more, and you don't say haftarah. On Rosh Chodesh, Chol HaMoed, you have four, and then they tell you what about the haftarah, etc. If there is a Musaf and no Yom Tov, you say four. You have four olim. You have Yom Tov 5, Yom Kippur 6, Yom Shabbat on Shabbat 7, and they explain the laws of the Bracha and haftarah. So again, we started with the Megillah, but we moved on to reading the Torah, and how exactly you read the Torah on each day. And in Mishnah 3, we find the concept of Minyan. There are certain things, there's a whole list here, that cannot be done pachot me'asara. You have to have 10 people to do it. And then we go back to reading the Torah. How many psukim, what are you allowed to translate to Aramaic, and who can read the Shema in front of the people, who can say Birkat Kohanim in front of the people, what if he looks different, and then certain tefillot that one can or cannot say. So now I'm going back to chapter 3. I know I'll explain later why I moved from chapter 3, why I skipped chapter 3 and went to chapter 4. Let's go to chapter 3. Bnei Ha'ir, Shemachru Echovah Shel Ha'ir, residents of town who sold the town square. Now have in mind, Bnei Ha'ir, the town residents of back then, are not like the town residents of today. They're more like people who live in the gated neighborhood who own the whole property. Nothing belongs to the municipality. Even whatever the municipality is made of residents who own the real estate, including the public spaces. So when they all get together, they could sell the plaza to someone else. And what do you do with the money? You could buy with it a synagogue. You can not anything less holy than a synagogue. Why? Because the plaza of the city has a certain degree of sanctity, because when there are public fest days, this is where people gather. And then there's a whole list of what you could buy if you sold the Bet Knesset. You have to buy something holier, the Ark. So the Ark, you buy covers of the Sefer Torah. You sold that, you could buy Sefer Torah, etc., but not the other way around. Then in Mishnah 2, what are the rules or conditions for selling a synagogue? In Mishnah 3, what happens with a synagogue that is now in ruins and you cannot use it as a synagogue? And then in Mishnah 4, Rosh Chodesh Adar shechal yod b'Shabbat, on 4 special Shabbatot, this is what you read. You stop to say this, you stop to say that. On Pesach, this is what you read. On Hanukkah, this is what you read. And then we get to chapter 4 that speaks about the Megillah. So it's all like a riddle. I mean, if you studied Masechet Megillah in the past, either in Mishnah or in Talmud, most probably you did not notice that. And I'm not saying, and I know because I did not notice that when I studied Masechet Megillah. Why? Because I studied Megillah as a Mishnah in elementary school, and probably they made me recite it by heart. You know, there was like probably I did at one point all of Seder Moed, you know, at one point or another, and then I studied in the yeshiva or on my own. But when I studied in yeshiva, I did it like I'm telling you, you study one Mishnah and you read the Gemara on it, and another Mishnah and the Gemara on it, right? And it goes on and on and on. So you forget what you read in the previous Mishnah. It's a very important thing to look at the full structure of a Masechet, of a tractate of Mishnah before you read the Talmud, even if you don't learn it word by word, just to get a sense of what the structure is. When I was in high school in Israel, my teachers of Tanakh had a very annoying habit of telling us, read the chapter, divide it into subsections, and give a title to each section. And I'm saying it was annoying because In Tanakh, it's not so clear, especially when you read Nevi'im, and titles are subjective. It's not so clear. But still, I think it's a good practice when you read the Mishnah, when you read the Tanakh. You don't have to be so rigid as to exactly define what's in each section, but you do want to see the general structure. So I think the really intriguing thing about Masechet Megillah, you go back and read maybe more in depth and pay attention to all these details, is how incoherent it is in a way. There are several halachot about Megillah, and then a lot of associative thinking there, and then we start talking about the Bet Knesset, and then reading the Torah, and then reading the Megillah, and then back to the Torah. What's happening there, right? So, Masechet Megillah is a classic example of patchwork of a tractate that didn't have much. There was not much to talk about Purim. I know it sounds strange when you look today. You look up rabbinic literature, you will find volumes on Purim, but it's by that token you will find volumes on anything. If you Google, clipping your nails, I did it once because I was looking for halacha to see what people say on clipping them on Shabbat, whether it's rabbinical or biblical. I found in a certain halacha website an article titled 27 things to know about, clipping your nails according to halakha. 27 halachot. Where did they get this from? Right? So with Purim was very simple, the way the Megillah says it. Read the Megillah, have a meal, share it with others. That's it. But then you have more and more. But in the Mishnah, there's not that much material. So there were like the first two chapters that are focused on halachot that are related to Purim and the Megillah reading, but they're not too much. So it was beefed up by adding certain halachot that are related only by their formulaic appearance. There's no difference between this except for the no, etc. Now, chapters 3 and 4 are not even about Megillah. It's about the Bet Knesset. You realize chapter 3 starts with what happens when you buy a Bet Knesset. This is a sort of like zooming out, honing in from a bird's eye view of the Bet Knesset, and then you zoom in into the Bet Knesset. So you start from afar. What do you see? You see a city. There's the city plaza. That's where you read the Torah when there is a fast day. So the Torah is in the center, but it's outside. And then you say, what if you sell it? You could buy a Bet Knesset. It's holier. You sell a Bet Knesset. You could buy an ark. You could buy the covers for the Sefer Torah, and then you could buy the Sefer Torah. So really, chapter 3 and 4 are the halachot of the Bet Knesset, of the Sefer Torah. And in the middle of that discussion, we find the discussion of what we would call the Minyan. So I'm going to that Mishnah now. Obviously, we cannot cover everything. There's a lot to see there. So I want to focus on this Mishnah, chapter 4, Mishnah 3. It says this, En porsin et hashema. There's a lot of en. You don't do this, you don't do this, unless you have pahot me'asara. I mean, you have to have at least 10 people for all the following. So what are they? En porsin et shema. Translation, one does not recite the introductory prayers and blessing before Shema. This is a highly contested translation. The Gemara is not clear on what Poresin et Shema means. Another explanation is that the portions of Shema were divided between different readers. But anyway, there's a certain things that is done with the Shema that must be done when 10 people are present. Ve'en ovrim lifnei hateva, and one cannot pass before the ark, meaning to be the Chazan who leads the tefillah. Ve'en nosim et kapehem, and you cannot say Birkat Kohanim, literally raising your palms to say Birkat Kohanim. Ve'en korin ba'Torah, you cannot read the Torah. En maftirim ba'Navi, you cannot read the Haftarah. Ve'en osim ma'amad u'moshav, and you don't practice the custom of standing up and sitting down during a funeral procession unless you have 10 people. Ve'en omrim birkat avelim v'tanchumei avelim u'birkat hatanim, and you cannot say the blessing for the mourners, or to offer condolences to the mourners, or the blessing of a bride and groom if you don't have less than 10 people, if you don't have 10 people. ואין מזמנין בשם פחות מעשרה, and you can't say zimun with Hashem's name less if you have less than 10 people. ובקרקעות תשעה וכהן ואדם כיוצא בהן, and if you have to evaluate, to assess the value of land or the value of a human being in case that human being dedicated himself to the temple. It's a very rare thing, but people used to do it back in the day. They would say, I'm dedicating my worth to the temple. Then you have to bring someone to assess him. It has to be 10 people. So we have all these halachot, and one of them is the Amidah. And this is really, we could say, the source for the requirement to have a minyan in order to say tefillah comes from this Mishnah. Now, let me ask this question. Is this Mishnah really about minyan? And what stands out for me is this: you don't sit and stand during the funeral. They used to, when having a funeral, they used to stop every couple of feet, whatever, on their way. Used to be a long way because they would walk out of the city, not like we do today from the hearse to the burial site. They used to stop and sit down as a sign of mourning and then get up again and move again. And you have to have at least 10 people to do it. The same, a blessing for the mourners, condolences, or a blessing for the bride and groom cannot be said with less than 10 people. The question is this a problem of minyan when we talk about those issues, or what is really the concept here? Could it be a yes, Shai?
אני חושב שזה פשוט הדברים שאי אפשר לעשות עם פחות מ10 אנשים.
Okay, yeah, we need 10 people, but for what? How would you define it? I mean, you look for the practical or legal term for that. That you want to have a certain number of people for a certain procedure, certain process, certain ritual. What would you call it? If not minyan, if not a religious requirement, what would it be?
You think they're looking for assurance of camaraderie, companionship?
So that could be said with when you speak about the mourners and about the hatanim, right? But you feel also that in tefillah, interesting. Okay, so camaraderie, it's good. Okay, what about? Okay, when I guess as a pulpit rabbi, I had to sit in too many board meetings, in the synagogue. And in order to start the meeting, we would wait for something to be fulfilled, a certain condition, so the meeting could take place. When you have enough members of the board, what is it called?
Quorum.
Quorum, right? So decorum comes from what word?
Like decorum?
Yeah, decorum. What is the etymology of the word decorum?
Deca, so 10.
Deca in Latin is 10, right? So you need a decorum. You need 10 people to do something official. It has nothing to do with kedusha. It has to do with importance. So when we'll go back to this Mishnah in Masechet Megillah, it speaks about the synagogue. How do you handle things in the synagogue? The sanctity of the synagogue, the sanctity of the Sefer Torah, and then he speaks about the decorum. You need a decorum to do certain things, because if you don't wait together 10 people to do it, it shows lack of importance. You disregard that issue. So, and I think what Nathaniel said about camaraderie also kicks in, because if we, it's two aspects of the same thing. Oh no, I'm talking about quorum. Sorry, yeah, quorum. But the quorum also is I think ready that. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Sorry, thank you for correcting me. But the quorum is necessary, because this is how we force people to, when a board meeting, right, requires a certain number of people to be there. It tells those board members, we're not going to hold the meeting without you. You can't skip it. You have to be there. When we tell people we have to have 10 people to comfort the mourners, so everybody thinks, okay, if I'm not going to be there, then we're not going to be able to offer condolences or to say Birkat Avelim. And this still works until today. Almost any synagogue will tell you it's very hard to get a minyan during the week. But if we tell people one of our members needs to say Kaddish, please show up, everybody comes, and you'll have more than what you need. But what stems from this, and when we compare this to Masechet Berakhot, we see that there are two separate things here. Masechet Berakhot doesn't deal with the issues of tefillah b'tzibur, the communal tefillah, and Masechet Megillah also doesn't deal really with the full details of the communal tefillah, rather on the laws of Bet Knesset and the quorum in the Bet Knesset. How do you run things in the synagogue? So now this is just a general comment on the structure of the Mishnah, which is important because it has major halachic implications, especially in this time and age, with us having Zoom minyanim, and also with the question of counting women for minyan. So this is the kind of halacha that you could learn from the way the Mishnah was structured. It's not just the historical detail, and that's why it's important. When we do that introduction to halachic literature, we're not just asking the question of, okay, who wrote this? How was it structured? What came first? What was the guiding principle? Sometimes, by the way a certain halacha is written, we can understand the mechanisms behind the halacha. So if we see that the laws of tefillah and prayers are in Masechet Berakhot, and then the laws of Bet Knesset are in Masechet Megillah, we understand that when we talk about En Omrim, whatever, you can't say this with less than 10 people, right? It's about the importance of the tefillah in not only as a community, but in a communal space. So you say in the Bet Knesset, we must have 10 people. What if you pray at home? Do you have to have 10 people? Not necessarily. What if you have special circumstances that, just like in a board meeting, right? You need to have a quorum for the meeting, but certain board members cannot make it. Then you might alter your requirements, right? So indeed, the Talmud says, I'm not going to go into the Talmud now. The question of someone who comes late to the synagogue, and which never happened, by the way, in my synagogue. Everybody would come on time. It's because I made the time reason. I'm not kidding, but some people would come late. But one of the ways I found to circumvent that is, instead of saying we start at 8:30, and people come and wait 45 minutes to start, we say we start at 9:15, Ishtabah, and then people are sort of on time. But yeah, people would come late to the synagogue, and the Gemara says, what do you do? Where do you start from? There are two opinions, and the difference between them is, can you say Kedusha on your own or not? And one opinion says, yes, you could say Kedusha when you're on your own. Kedusha, you could say Nagdishach v'na'aritzach, like Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot melech haaretz kivodo, even when you pray b'yachid. Why? Because you're not doing it as someone who leads the communal prayer. So that concept, that it becomes so solid in halacha, and you could find like in hundreds of books since the time of the Talmud talking about that concept, that you need to have 10 people in order to say Kedusha or Kaddish or all these things, is really, in the original context of the Mishnah, is not a religious question. It's not a question of saying, okay, if you are only 2 people, God is not going to come to visit you. If you are 1 person, you're not allowed to say Hashem's name. No, it's about we want to ensure that there are enough people in the synagogue, so we could give tefillah that importance. So what do you do, for example, if you live in the city? And I have one of my students told me that's their situation, where you only have 3 Jewish families, and they can't move. Today it's very common, I know people ask the rabbis, what do I do? There's no Jewish community in my area. Oh, you need to move. So not an option for many people. They might be working with the military. There might be scientists, stationed in certain places. They cannot move. Could be a physical problem, medical problem, there are many people like that. Why are we telling them you're cut off from a community? So what do you do, students? Thank you, Shai, right? What do you do when you have only 3 people in your immediate neighborhood that could come to Minyan? So in that case, those people are the quorum. If you are 2 people, if you're 1, and that's your situation, that's what you do. When the rabbi said you have to have 10 people, they said you're in a city. They're thinking about a city or a village where you have enough Jews. It says, if from all these people you can draw 10 to come and join together to say the tefillah, then don't say it. Then tefillah is not important for you. But if you can have it, then this is your. If your community in total is 10 people, then you realize that sometimes you can only have 5 or 6, and the same. I think the same principle could be applied to the question of the participation of men and women in tefillah. Why did the rabbi say back in the day, asara anashim, you have to have 10 men? They did not count women, because back in the day, unfortunately, women were not important. They were not considered important to be part of the communal leadership when it comes to tefillah. It is not so today. Women are counted in terms of minyan, including Kirat Torah, everything. Women are counted anywhere else in our society. So to hold back and to say, no, we still, within Judaism, they are not important, it's to ignore reality. So we say this is what the rabbi said. The rabbi said that because they lived then, just like the American Constitution. So when it speaks about all people, it means all free males, and not about women, not about slaves. But wise people who came afterwards look at this text and they realize, okay, it was said in a certain time, a certain context. So that was an example. It was important to me to show how, through the structure of the Mishnah, we understand halachot that later on became embedded in our culture in a way that it almost it's impossible to move or change, or in the Orthodox world, where it's clearly not the case. So it's important to understand really the structure of the Mishnayot, whichever Masechet you're going to learn, and hopefully, like I always say, our learning is not just for theoretical purposes; it's for practical purposes, and Be'ezrat Hashem will be able to bring it about.